Or find us on social media.
BBC Radio Northampton.
Very cruel. Now, he's been our man at Westminster for more than half of the life of BBC Local Radio. So, well, he's covered a few political events.
In short, it is time to put up or shut up.
There is no greater honour than to serve them, and serve them we will.
And our guiding duty is to stand, to fight, to win, and to serve.
One of the biggest decisions this country will face in our lifetimes, whether to remain in a reformed European Union or to leave.
Together, we will build a better Britain.
You must stay at home.
Just a few highlights from Paul Rowley's career, who has interviewed every Prime Minister since Harold Wilson. He's been doing it since he was a teenager, and today it's coming to an end. It's his last working day at the corporation for Paul Rowley, who joined us earlier on from where else? Westminster.
Good morning, Annabel.
Gosh, how are you feeling about this? This seems quite significant for you, given how long you've been doing this.
It's like any other day I've had in 47 years as a journalist. You know, I started as a teenage scribbler on a newspaper. I spent much of my time in commercial radio, 34 years of it at Westminster, 28 as a corporation boy at the BBC. I get up early, try to do my best to make this complicated thing called politics understandable, even though much of it might be irrelevant to many of our listeners, and dare I say, a bit boring sometimes. So even though off air I'm pretty serious, I'm disciplined, I'm organised, I do an awful lot of prep before I go on the wireless. But when the mic comes on, Annabel, I think I try to jazz it up a bit, you know. I occasionally have been known to sing. I don't know if you know, but I'm a Wigan Athletics supporter. And comedy, which is my other great love. I always say successful politics is a bit like comedy. It's all about timing, and Radders will like that because his dad was a great actor, you know. And but yeah, the old ones are the best. But I do cover the serious stuff. We've had a lot of it in the last few years when we've spoken about COVID and Brexit. I'm one of the few still around to have covered the two European referendums, the one in 75 as well as 2016. I've covered both Iraq wars too, in 1991 and 2003, and along the way I've interviewed 10 Prime Ministers. I think we've just heard from 6 of them. I've covered 13 general elections and done, dare I tell you, 42 years of party conferences. I think it's a record, but it's been a total joy and a privilege to be doing it for so long for an industry that I love.
You need a medal for those party conferences, Paul. Come on, of the 10 Prime Ministers then, the trickiest to interview?
Boris Johnson's hard, but I've got a knack to it, which is you try to interrupt him, but he doesn't. He still carries on talking, but then you try to interrupt him again and you put him off his stride. I did a good interview with him 3 days before the general election, which I was quite pleased with, notwithstanding he didn't do Andrew Neil when he was working for us, but I think I got a good little interview out of him in that one. Tony Blair, David Cameron were an absolute delight to talk to generally. Margaret Thatcher was quite frightening. Harold Wilson I knew because he was one of my local MPs. I worked in Liverpool as a political editor at Radio City, the commercial station there, got to know him quite well. I spent 6 weeks following John Major around the country at the 1992 election. I think I covered him, interviewed him about 3 times a day. So he was a very, very generous chap in certain respects, a very likeable fellow who won the election against the odds back in 1992. They've all been different, and as I say, I've been privileged to watch all these people. They will say politics ends in failure because ultimately you have to move on and lose their jobs. I've been privileged to stay in my job for the best part of, as I say, almost half a century, more than a third of a century at Westminster. Every day has been an absolute delight doing what I love, talking on the wireless.
The Sound.
The sound of South Yorkshire and North Derbyshire.
Toby at breakfast. BBC
Radio Sheffield.
Good morning, it's Toby at breakfast. It's BBC Radio Sheffield. Don't forget we want your spooky stories today. We're doing a little bit of Halloween, but something that, well, it's a good news story, I suppose, for Paul. It's a shame for the BBC. He's been doing his job for nearly 50 years, and today's his last day. Yeah, you'll have heard Paul Rowley and me nattering about all things politics over the years, and of course, a few years ago when we did a little bit more politics than we do now on here, he was on all the time. We talked to the whole Brexit thing and everything. It's been a lovely old trip for him. Today is when he packed it all in. Here's a little reminder of Paul Rowley. Let's talk to our Westminster correspondent, Paul Rowley. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Toby.
Here's Paul Rowley, our political correspondent. Good morning, Paul.
Happy New Year to you, Toby.
Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Toby.
Morning, how are you? Long time no speak.
I've not had a haircut for 7 months. Hopefully I will do in a fortnight's time when they reopen. I don't know the name of these films. I remember when I was at school there was one called Danish Dentist on the Job. Never saw it myself, but it was a great title. But it's highly embarrassing for a Home Secretary whose job in the old days was to protect our morals. So she's been given a bit of a public kicking in the media.
It says here, what's your thoughts on the campaign? Do you know what? I think it's been has it been boring?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been risk-averse. I mean, all the party leaders, you see them out on the stump, but they're not actually talking to real people for the most part, so they don't get into the Gordon Brown, Gillian Duffy moment, nor when, John Prescott had to punch a voter.
After months of speculation, today looks like being the day when Theresa May sets out when she'll be leaving Downing Street. Earlier on, I spoke to our political correspondent, Paul Rowley, and in the words of 4 non-blondes, I asked him, what's going on?
Nothing officially, Toby, but at 10 o'clock this morning, Theresa May is due to meet Sir Graham Brady, who's the chairman of the Conservative 1922 Committee, and the indications are she'll set out the timetable for her exit from Number 10.
It's a big day in politics today, too. Boris Johnson will break off from general election campaigning to meet the Donald.
You never know what to expect with Donald J. Trump, frankly, Toby, but he's been told quite firmly, I gather, by the Prime Minister's team not to say anything about the election.
It's back to business at Westminster this morning as the MPs are going back to the Commons after the general election. Our political correspondent Paul Rowley has been telling us what to expect.
It's the start of a new era, almost, Toby. No more late-night sittings, no more crunch votes, almost certainly no more government defeats.
Well, that's the Westminster Waltz, by the way, by Russ Conway. You knew that. He's covered 13 general elections, into 10 prime ministers. He's done 42 years of party conferences, 5 US presidential elections, 2 EU referendums, 2 Iraq wars, plus endless crises, scandals and resignations. And today, he's got one big retirement. Paul Rowley, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Toby.
Well, what a day.
Yeah, but it's like any other day, really. I'm warbling on the wireless in the morning and trying to make this complicated thing called politics understandable, even though, let's be honest, much of it may be irrelevant to our listeners and, dare I say, maybe a little boring sometimes. You forgot to add, for 4 years, I covered Sheffield Wednesday and Sheffield United in every game they played in London because Radio Hallam had the commentary rights at the time in the late 1990s.
The bad old days.
Yeah.
It seems odd to ask what the highlights are. There's been that many, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, I was fortunate in the first instance to cover politics in Liverpool, which is far more divisive and busy and aggressive than it is in Westminster. And it's pretty bad here at times, I have to say. But having covered the budget crisis there, which led to councillors being kicked out of office or kicked out the Labour Party with Derry Hatton. I remember David Blunkett was the leader of Sheffield City Council, rather cleverly in a way. He went to the edge but didn't go over the edge. Liverpool, they do things differently. As a result of that, I won an awful lot of awards for covering politics in Liverpool. The BBC tried to, how do you put this, poach me at the time. I said no for several years, but I finally, grew up a little bit and crossed the floor, and I've been with you for 28 years, all told, as a corporation boy. But I like to have a little bit of fun, Toby, because, to be honest with you, I've got no political views about anything. It's something I kind of fell into, but I've done an awful lot of coverage over 47 years as a journalist. But my great love is music. I wanted to be a disc jockey. Believe it or not, when I was 17 years old, I made my debut on BBC Radio Merseyside. Like you, I was a comedian. I wrote a comedy series, believe it or not, about local radio, which was also broadcast by BBC Radio Manchester. So even then, I was doing more than one radio station at any given time. And I told my parents I wanted to be a comedian, Toby, and they And they laughed at me. They're not laughing now, as the great Bob Monkhouse said, and he is one of my heroes, along with the great Kenny Everett.
Well, that is the thing that a lot of people won't know about you, because you're known so much for the political coverage. But of course, Kenny Everett, pirate radio, your football, which is a huge passion of yours.
It's a mix of doing all these things rather than being cocooned in one particular area, and to do lots of different things. And it keeps you busy, it keeps you active. It's non-stop. It's like being in the fast lane for all this time. I did 2 documentaries about Kenny Everett. One got a Sony Radio Award, which is the kind of Oscars of our industry. One got a Frank Gillard Award, which is a BBC Local Radio Award. I'm pleased with that. You've won a few of those in your time. So have I. Absolutely delightful when that thing happens, when members of your own profession choose you for these things. It's a great moment, and I've never ever taken it for granted. So you need an awful lot of hard work behind the scenes as well. I'm quite serious when I'm off the air. I'm quite quiet when I'm off the air, largely because I'm absolutely cream cracker, because I'm talking all the time.
He has been our man at Westminster for more than half of his life on BBC Local Radio. He's interviewed every Prime Minister since Harold Wilson. He's been doing it since he was a teenager. And today it all comes to an end, well, almost, as it's his last working day at the corporation for our political correspondent, Paul Rowley, who is with us right now from Westminster. Morning to you, Paul.
Good morning, Mark.
Lovely to have you on. Let me just have a quick email here. Here's Dave. Mark, no, he's a real pro. He's a legend in everyone's breakfast time. He's very knowledgeable. What's he doing? So come on then, Paul. You got love of the listeners. It's a historic day, isn't it, for you, my friend? Oh, what are we going to do without you?
It's like any other day I've had in my 47 years as a journalist, Mark. Since I started as a teenage scribbler, you were on The Guardian, I was on The Times, the brutal Times. I've had 34 years at Westminster, 28 of them as a corporation boy at the BBC. I started out wanting to become a disc jockey. I did a comedy series, sounds rather grand, when I was 17 on BBC Radio Merseyside, also broadcast by BBC Radio Manchester. And I made my debut 47 years ago this week, in the first week of Radio City, the commercial station in Liverpool, the largest outside London, covering non-league football. So I've done lots of different things. Somehow I fell into covering politics, even though I didn't really care for it. But it's kind of made me, really, in many respects, won lots of awards over the years, to which I'm absolutely privileged. But the joy has been talking to you. And I'm not talking to you, Mark, exclusively. I'm talking to you, the listener, because the listeners make it worthwhile. It's that emotional connection I've always felt that makes radio work. You can't get that on the telly, can you? Because the pictures are so much better on radio, as they say. But the joy is I'm a radio listener, and that's my most important qualification.
Well, it's interesting about that, because when Matt Hancock was caught, you know what?
Yeah.
Bit of slap and tickle in the office, all that sort of stuff. I remember my mum, she said, I wonder what Paul Rowley's going to say about that. She was looking forward to what you had to. You didn't let her down, because I think the phrase was, what was the phrase? How
on the job.
How could he be concentrating on the job when he was on the job?
On the job.
Which I think probably
I tell you what, I wouldn't have got away with that on Radio 4. But the thing is, the listeners are smart. They're not going to complain about things like that, because the listeners know more than we do. And that's the thing. You can be a little bit prudish and a bit too, you can be a bit serious sometimes. And what I'm talking about is serious when I'm talking about COVID or Brexit, because it directly affects people. But as you know, I'm very serious off air. I'm very disciplined. I'm very organised. I do an awful lot of prep before I go on the wireless. But I have been known to sing occasionally, Mark. And did I ever tell you I supported Wigan Athletic?
Yeah.
Who are actually playing Cheltenham at the back end of January. Yeah. And under the terms of my departure, I'm allowed to freelance with the BBC after 3 months. So I might just get that game in. So that's the other good thing. But as I say, comedy is my other great love. And as you know, Mark, politics is like comedy in that it's all about timing.
Hey, you. We also know, because great admiration for Mike Darbo, who, of course, lives in Gloucestershire, lives in the Stroud Valleys. And I know you used to watch him when he was in the Band of Angels before he then became Man from Man. And I know Mike has connected with you and popped in some photographs and some messages. But I know you love your music. And the one thing often we've done with Paul, especially when Paul joins us in the first hour when we play a bit of music, is whatever song is lined up next, I play it, he has to beat the intro and tell us what it is. So it wouldn't be fair not to do that now, would it? So I've picked 4 tunes. Wouldn't. I think you should get them all, but that's no pressure. So let's do number 1. Here we go, Mr. Rowley.
Oh, it's easy. 74. I remember hearing this on the opening day of Piccadilly Radio on the 2nd of April, 1974. It's the Rubettes, Sugar Baby Love, and Paul Da Vinci on lead vocals.
And he hit it. He hit the vocal. Okay, here's a slam dunk.
Oh yeah, Mike Darbo wrote this. It's the Foundations, 1968 or even 9, and it was the number 1 as well. It's Bill Me Up Buttercup, and Mike always said this was his insurance policy.
And when he wrote it, true story, Paul, he offered it to David Essex, who said, I'm not going to sing a song about a cow. It's absolutely true. So he gave it to the Foundations. Now, here's one you did recently that we were staggered by, and you got it, the skin of your teeth. So I'm going to give you another go, just in case you've forgotten it. Here we go. It's a great tune. This is...
I would never forget it, and it's a great record, one-hit wonder, 1976 or even 5. It's Sniffing the Tears and Driver's Seat.
Hit the riff again. Right, I'm going to play. I'm going to hit you one more. This is famous band, but it's not. Well, I love this song. I think it's their best song. But when you play this band on the radio, everyone plays one record, but they should play this one more often. This is back into your era, I think. So, Mr. Rowley, don't blow it for the final time. So here we go.
I just love this record. It's 1968, and it's The Love Affair and the follow-up to Everlasting Love, which was originally recorded by Robert Knight. This was also recorded by Robert Knight and written by the same people. It's called... I've forgotten. No, I haven't. Rainbow Valley.
Oh, thank heavens for that. Could have been
teased you there, didn't I?
Last time on Radio Gloucestershire, you worded me there.
Heading home again.
Won't be the last time on Radio Gloucestershire, because you still have got to come and visit Forest Green Rovers. I'm going to give you the tour of Forest Green Rovers, because you've done virtually all the ground, but you haven't done Forest Green yet, have you?
I haven't. Would you let me have a steak pie, though?
So
I'll get into trouble, won't I? Well, I always get into trouble. I do push it a bit, I know that. But my whole point is, just make radio a little bit dangerous occasionally, We can't be too bland. And I know I get in trouble with your management, and I know that you help me out in those meetings you have after your programmes.
I defend you.
And I know I've had yellow cards over the years, but I hope I've made it interesting occasionally.
Now, when you come on and say something, this is going to be another half an hour in the debrief. I just text my wife Jo. I said Rowley's just said this, so I said I'd be back by 12, but it's probably going to be 1 o'clock today.
Your lifestyle changes when you bump into me.
Oh, Paul, we've loved having you on. It's great, but we will meet again, because hopefully you get to Cheltenham and we'll show you a bit of Gloucestershire. We'll show you Forest Green Rovers, and we'll have a lot of fun. But thank you so much, and enjoy your last day, Mr. Rowley. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And you probably think I say this to every station, but you're my favourite station. But really, Radio Gloucestershire is up there with the best. And I've been delighted to work for you. And all your staff are absolutely brilliant. And they've all been incredibly supportive, even when I'm a naughty boy. And of course, my broadcasting hero was always a naughty boy, the enfant terrible Kenny Everett. He was always being sacked. Thankfully, I've avoided that in the course of my 47 years in the business. Actually, I've never actually applied for a job. I couldn't do a CV. I've no idea how you do it. I've been incredibly lucky, but it's such a delight to talk to the people of Radio Gloucestershire, even though I have one complainant who always says, we don't play football in Gloucestershire, we play rugby. Well, you do play football, because you've got 2 great football teams, one in League One after being champions last year of League Two, and the other one could well be champions of League Two in this coming season.
Thank you, Paul Rowley. God love you, God bless you. We'll take you to the new lawn, but I can't guarantee a steak pie.
BBC BBC Radio Berkshire.
This is a moment for the last time. Here's our political correspondent, Paul Rowley. Hi, Paul.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. You see, you've been part of my shows on BBC Radio Berkshire since 1994. I can't believe there's a single week since 1994 that we haven't spoken to each other.
Well, funny enough, 1994, the 10th of January was my first day at the BBC, having had 20 years before that in commercial radio and in newspapers. I started as a teenager on the Southport Visitor, and then I went to the Times, and I was the editor of the Times. Well, I was the news editor of the Bootle Times. I was only 21, though, and that was a great responsibility. I started in commercial radio, Andrew, 47 years ago this week, in the opening week of Radio City, and I've been on the wireless ever since. I was covering non-league football at the time, and my hometown club, Wigan Athletic, were in non-league. They were in the Premier League, the Northern Premier League. They eventually got to the Premier League, where they played, among others, Reading, and they've actually played Reading in all 4 divisions of the Football League, so we have a lot in common. And I never actually went to Elm Park, but I always enjoyed my time at the Medeski, seeing AD and the lads. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. Can't quite believe I've done it for so long when you start to calculate it. 47 years as a journalist, 34 years at Westminster, 28 as a corporation boy.
And it's funny you mentioned the football, because actually when we started doing the politics together on the radio in 1994, you won't have known this, but you were already very familiar to me as a football broadcaster. I have very strong memories on my hospital radio show of having introduced you, I think, for the 1990 World Cup final, which you were doing reports on.
I was probably doing reports on it, but I wasn't actually there. I think what happened is the line went down and I had to do something in the office because I was the only person at Westminster that actually understood football. I've done that more than once. I did it for the BBC at one stage as well in 2002 when we didn't do that well in the World Cup. 1990, of course, we got to the semi-final, lost on penalties to Germany, which was a bit of the norm in the end. But yeah, I love covering the footy and I still do it. In fact, my last act as a corporation employee, tomorrow I'm covering Wigan Athletic versus Burton Albion. And when I started in 1974, they were both non-league football teams. Now they're in League One. So these things come round again. But it's been an absolute delight and a privilege to do what I do. I wanted to be a disc jockey. I started out doing a comedy series. This sounds rather grand, on Radio Merseyside when I was 17. Radio Manchester took it as well because it took the mickey out of BBC local radio, but they quite enjoyed it. And then the first thing I was paid for was covering non-league football on Radio City in commercial radio. So how I ended up covering politics is an oddity, really, but I'd done it on local papers where I realised that the stories weren't in the council chamber. You went to the pub with the councillors afterwards, and they were mostly blokes in those days, and they'd always have a few pints, and once they'd had a few, they'd tell you everything. So that's where I got my grounding, and to have covered as many elections as I have, it's 13, although I did do 2 my first year in 74, and all told I've interviewed 10 Prime Ministers, including Theresa May, who was very helpful, I found, when she was Conservative Party chairman in the early noughties. And it's been extraordinary. And 42 years, Andrew, of covering party conferences, and we all have a connection with Berkshire party conferences, but I don't think we've ever been to Berkshire. Normally they're by the seaside in Brighton and Blackpool in the old days, and Bournemouth. But
too expensive to have it here, that's the problem.
There's more inland. That would be the problem, I suspect, in many respects. But I
remember, just going back to, would it be about 1997, I think, and you and Prime Minister, I remember you coming on and impersonating, in 30 seconds, every Prime Minister you'd interviewed at that point, starting with Harold Wilson. I don't know whether you can still do that, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was on in the evening, 4 till 7 in the evening at that time. You came on. I don't know why we asked you to do it, but we got into this conversation about Prime Ministers you'd interviewed, and it was like John Coleshaw going, oh, well, I did Harold Wilson, and then this, and then this, then James Callaghan, then Margaret Thatcher, and so it went on.
I don't know what my Margaret Thatcher impersonation was like, but I mean, I did know Harold Wilson, as indeed, as you know, I know John Culshaw. We have actually, all three of us appeared together on your programme, actually, on Election Day, didn't we? And was it the one in 2017?
It would have been. I think it might have been Theresa May's last day as Prime Minister. I think it might have been that rather than an election. But yes, it was. I do remember us being on together.
Well, the oddity is that John Culshaw does an impersonation of me, because at the same time you were in hospital radio taking bits from independent radio news of me covering the footy. He used to listen to me in Ormskirk, where he was born, because I was on his local radio station, and I had a little bit of a lilt at the end of it. They call the standard out cue. In Liverpool, it was Paul Rowley, Radio City News, and in commercial radio in London, it was Paul Rowley, IRN Westminster. And I gave it that kind of theatrical thing, because I think people always remember that. In the same way, I always say, "Good morning, Andrew," in a kind of positive way. I mean, I remember Harold Wilson because he was one of my MPs in Liverpool, and I got a scoop with him a week before the election in 1983, when Michael Foot was leader. He lost to Margaret Thatcher rather heavily, and the week before, the BBC reporter had gone, and they'd asked him what was it like being Prime Minister, because it was his last day as an MP. I asked him what he thought about the election result next week, which is the most obvious question in the world, and he told me quite brutally that when he was Prime Minister, I wanted the Labour Party to be the natural party of government. These days, he said, they're not even the natural party of opposition. Well, it was a dynamite quote, and I went back to the office, told Independent Radio News, they led on it in the morning, LBC carried the whole interview, the Daily Mail had it on their front page the following day. There were lots of question marks being asked why the BBC didn't have this interview, by the way, and then they started to try to coerce me to join the BBC, which I did several years later. But in a report on the Labour Party's fortunes by their General Secretary Jim Mortimer, that interview was quoted as a factor in the reason they lost the election, although they did admit at the time they were losing it anyway, because the Labour Party split with the Social Democratic Party at the time, and that was one of the factors. But yeah, some extraordinary times interviewing Margaret Thatcher, who always called me young man, because I was young in those particular days. The only other person who ever called me young man was Brian Clough, I have to say, and I've interviewed him several times, and he was a politician of sorts. Neil Kinnock always called me kid, and always talked about my hair, because we have similar hair colouring, because it's red, although he'd always admitted I got more of it than him. And I still see him in the House of Lords, and he still calls me kid.
For the final time, Paul, good morning.
Good morning, what's your name again? Our Graham. How can I forget our Graham, as Cilla Black would say?
How are you feeling?
Quite overwhelmed, you know. I mean, I'm normally a pro, you know, serious off-air, disciplined, organised, do lots of prep before I go on the wireless. But in every radio station I've been on this morning, listeners are texting in, and Twitter is going mad. And people I've never met in the broadcasting hierarchy are saying lovely things about me. I didn't even know they were listening, to be honest with you. So it really is rather moving, I have to say. I think I've got something in my eye.
Oh, now you've been doing it a while. 47 years, 37 based at Westminster. What is can you pinpoint the most memorable moment? Can you choose one?
There's so many, to be frank with you. I mean, you know, I've done so many elections. I remember following John Major around the country when most people thought he was going to lose in 1992. I remember coming to Blackpool on one occasion very early on, and he won it against the odds. That was an important one. Covering the militant tendency in Liverpool, that was a national story for the best part of 4 years when the hard left was running a big city. But generally, it's been everything, really, because there's been so much going on. More recently, it's been the serious stuff about COVID and Brexit, which has affected everybody. It's been incredibly serious. But on other occasions, as you know, Graham, I like to have a bit of a laugh, to be frank with you. I try to jazz it up a bit. With references to things I really care about, because I wanted to be a disc jockey. I failed miserably in that field, but I always occasionally have been known to sing on the wireless. Sport, of course. Did I ever tell you I was a Wigan Athletics supporter?
Occasionally, yeah.
And comedy, and I wrote a comedy series in 1972, when I was at school at St John Rigby Grammar School in Wigan, which was broadcast by both Radio Merseyside and Radio Manchester. You were a bit far out then because you were only covering East Lancashire at BBC Radio Blackburn. But yeah, I've had this extraordinary career that if I tracked it, I never thought I would have achieved what I have achieved. But the great achievement is just talking to people, real people. And I find that quite easy, really, because believe it or not, I'm a member of the human race, even though I mix with politicians all the time. And at the end of the day, my great secret, if there is a secret, is I'm a radio listener. I love radio. And I think just about after all these years, I know the tricks. And I think I know what the listener likes.
Who's been your favourite Prime Minister to interview? Because you've interviewed a fair few.
I have. Harold Wilson was good because he was just down the road. He was one of my MPs in Liverpool. He gave me a scoop a week before the election in 1983, which made the national newspapers, which was rather good. Margaret Thatcher was rather frightening to interview, although she did call me young man every time I interviewed her. I once did her 3 days running, which my boss thought she must fancy you if she's asking you around 3 days running in those days. Tony Blair, I thought, was the best in terms of communication, the best communicator I'd ever dealt with, because they had to turn the Labour Party around after they'd won so many general elections. And the same I would say for David Cameron, although he was perceived as a failure after the Brexit vote. He had to go because he backed the wrong horse in that respect. So they've all been interesting. Interesting enough, I think, I started covering politics more widely at the party conferences in Blackpool, when they used to go to Blackpool. It's a shame they don't go anymore. I know there's lots of attempts to have a big conference centre there to get people back going there. And in the first conference I went to in 1980, Jim Callaghan had lost the election the year before for the Labour Party. Margaret Thatcher had taken over, and he wasn't doing any interviews that week. And at his first conference, I got the scoop. I got the only interview because he was meeting a delegation of workers from the Bowater paper mill at Ellesmere Port in Cheshire. We covered that constituency at Radio City, and he agreed to do the interview on condition I only talked about the paper mill. That's all I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to talk about who he was going to vote for in the subsequent leadership election. It was the lead on independent radio news, and the BBC said, how come this guy has beaten us to a story? And they spent a long time trying to court me to get me to come over to the corporation, which I did. I was in my late 30s at the time. I haven't regretted it. I haven't regretted a moment of my life, which has been very lucky, to follow your football team in the Cheshire League and to be paid to cover them winning the FA Cup. You can't do better than that, can you? Let's be honest with you. And I'm sure you felt the same when Blackburn won the league title in 1995.
Parker's been in touch. Loved how Paul would cut through all the waffle and explain some complex political issues in such an understandable manner. He'll be missed, our Graham. Enjoy your retirement, Paul Rowley. And Heather is in Bamber Bridge. Heather, good morning.
Good morning, Graham. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Heather.
And how are you feeling today, Heather? Because I broke the news and you're a bit shocked, aren't you?
I was absolutely shocked. I didn't hear the announcement. I just heard that he was leaving, and I am shocked because I've always listened to Paul, and I just find he's a great communicator of whatever's going on, and the wit and the humour that he injects into each story that he's talking about is fantastic. And yeah, you are going to be so sadly missed.
Oh, that's lovely, Heather. Thank you for that. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, that's my job, to make this complicated stuff, which often much of it's irrelevant, directly with our listeners like yourself. And sometimes it's a bit boring, and I'm honest enough to say that. I think when I came to the BBC, they're a bit...
Lots of commentators are boring, but you've managed to get us through Brexit and keep us sane. And then, of course, there was COVID straight after that, and you went and coped with that brilliantly, along with everything else, as you say, with all the years that you've been doing it. But, you will be missed, Paul, and thanks for your humour, and we really appreciate you, I've got a tear in my eye now.
Oh, that is absolutely lovely, Heather. And of course, I was educated in Preston because I went to the Poly there when it was a Poly. Preston is now a city, not a town as it was when I was there in 1973-74. And it was a great start in life doing the journalism course there. And I have fond memories of Avenham and Frenchwood, not that far away from Bamber Bridge.
Paul, it's been a joy. I'm sure you are going to be very, very busy. Thank you for everything that you've done. And this is from us all at Radio Lancashire. Paul Rowley, happy retirement.
Now, he's been our man at Westminster for more than half the life of BBC Local Radio. He's interviewed every Prime Minister since Harold Wilson. But today is the last working day at the Corporation for our political correspondent and local lad, Paul Rowley, who's been speaking to me about his career.
I was fascinated by radio, Claire, since the age of 7, when I first heard Alan Freeman presenting Pick of the Pops on the Old Light programme. And believe it or not, it was the only radio show that played pop records. But along came the Pirates at Radio Caroline North off the Isle of Man, and I really wanted to run away to sea to be a pirate radio disc jockey. But at the age of 9, and I couldn't swim, that was out of the question. But I was really fascinated by BBC Local Radio. But I heard Radio Merseyside on its opening day on the 22nd of November 1967, and I kept writing to presenters there, including Brian Smart, who really changed my life. He had a Saturday morning programme, and I wrote, and this sounds rather grand, Claire, I wrote a comedy series which Brian put together, and he put it out on radio. Radio Manchester down the East Lancs Road heard about it. They broadcast it too, and all of a sudden I got my foot in the door effectively. I went off to become a student journalist at Preston. I joined the Southport Visitor. I then moved to the Times, the Bootle Times. But before that, Radio City came on the air. They sent out a brochure saying they were going to cover non-league football. Well, I was covering non-league football for the newspaper. I phoned up, and I don't think they'd read their own brochures. They said, well, actually, we haven't got anybody covering non-league football. Do you fancy doing it for us? So I did the first sports programme on the opening week. I joined the station full-time in 1977, stayed for a decade, and covered the best story in politics outside London for 4 years, and that was the militant tendency running the city council.
So you've 3 great loves, well, that we know about anyway, which is football, radio and politics. You've managed to combine them all there, and obviously politics is what we know you for now, because that's what you report on so brilliantly for BBC Local Radio. But those days in the 80s, and I know you and I have spoken about it, you know, as I've taken on that job as political reporter, and I know it was a very tense and difficult time, and it must have been difficult to report on, even though I know how much you enjoyed the job.
It wasn't difficult at all, to be honest with you. You know, there was an exclusive every hour, frankly. Somebody asked me what was the difference between politics in Liverpool and politics at Westminster when I came down, when the 47 councillors who'd set an illegal budget were kicked out of office, and Derek Hatton and about a dozen supporters of the militant tendency who were kicked out of the Labour Party. I will say it's much quieter at Westminster because so much was going on. The city went almost bankrupt. There was controversy about lots of the appointments. And on one occasion, you know, not only were there demonstrations and marches, but on one Wednesday afternoon at a city council meeting over the appointment of a guy called Sam Bond as their black community advisor, who was a militant, the local community, the black community in Liverpool 8 largely, opposed that appointment, and they staged a demo in the town hall. Somebody saw me recording all this, smashed up my tape recorder, or tried to, broke my microphone in half, and gave me a whack in the face. And so I then got to go and report on the radio about a riot in which I am involved. But the following day in the Liverpool Echo, they mentioned it in their editorial and saying how horrendous that a reporter simply doing his job should be attacked. I was on the front page of a number of national newspapers, including the Daily Star.
And obviously nothing as dramatic, I'm sure, in terms of your own personal safety happened when you're at Westminster. But how did reporting on Liverpool City Council prepare you for reporting at the House of Commons?
It was piece of cake, to be honest with you, because seriously, I mean, because it is quite dignified and safe down here, and of course there is lots of security these days. Of course, I did see bombings take place, a mortar bomb attack on Downing Street in 1991. That was one of those extraordinary moments, really, and a sad moment, of course. Thankfully, nobody was killed, but of course we've had subsequently terrorist attacks over the years. In those days, it was a daily occurrence, obviously, in Northern Ireland. That was something that was very concerning to people. So when finally Tony Blair got the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, I thought that was the most significant thing that had happened in my life, really, because we'd been used to, and I've got Irish family history, we've been used to lots of bombings in Ireland over the years.
And during your career at Westminster, you've interviewed every Prime Minister since Harold Wilson. Have you kept a diary, Paul?
I have kept a diary, yeah. So I've kept a diary since I was a child. So I'm very meticulous and organised and disciplined and quite serious off the air. It's when the microphone comes on, I turn into Kenny Everett almost, who was my broadcasting hero, who did broadcast on Radio Merseyside when he was fired from Radio 1. But I've kept a diary, and one of my best interviews was the week before the general election in 1983. Went along to Huyton Labour Club, where Harold Wilson was bowing out as an MP, and lots of cameramen were there asking about his life and times as Prime Minister. They all went. I was the last person there. I asked him a more important question: how's Labour going to go on next week in the general election? And he gave me a dynamite quote, which was to say, when I was Prime Minister, when he won 4 elections out of 5, I saw Labour as the natural party of government. These days, he said, we're not even the natural party of opposition. The Labour Party heard it, were absolutely devastated that he just said this, because there was no minders with him, and they thought this should not be happening. This is damage in our campaign. And so that was a great moment. The Daily Mail led on the story the following day. So, and in the inquest afterwards, that was seen as a factor in why Labour lost the election. I think they realised they were losing the election anyway, because Michael Foot was leader. His policies were seen to be too left-wing at the time. There was also the split with the Social Democratic Party, and Margaret Thatcher came through the middle and got a landslide majority. It started a career, and I thought, well, I'll never be a disc jockey. And that was where I found my niche and my role. But it wasn't planned, I have to say, Claire. And I've had a wonderful life. 47 years as a journalist since I started. 34 years at Westminster, 28 of them at the BBC, and privileged on occasion to appear on BBC Radio Merseyside, the station I first heard on the day it came on the air, and when I was privileged to walk through the door when you were in Commerce House in Sir Thomas Street as a young kid fresh out of short trousers.
Paul Rowley, who leaves the BBC today.